Hey everyone, and welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. Today's tutorial is such a fun one. Today we're going to make a Santa snack pouch. So as you know, I have been playing around with those adorable little Santa embroidery designs from So Inspired by Bonnie, and I'll have a link for them down in the description of this video. Today we're actually going to make another one of those Santas, except this time we're going to make it over on the Ricoma EM1010, which is a 10 needle embroidery machine. You'll see this time it's a lot quicker because we don't have a whole bunch of thread changes. I'm going to use 10 colors, which is perfect because I've only got 10 spots, which means I don't have to change my thread at any point. And then after we're done embroidering our little Santa, we're gonna turn it into a giant cookie bag. So this is a very large cookie bag. I actually got a little bit of grief from my family because they said this was not a cookie bag size. 2020 begs to differ. I think this is a perfect size. If you're having like a neighborhood cookie exchange, this is a great way to store them. Depending on the lining, of course, is gonna depend on what you can put in this bag. So you can see for this version here, the outer panel is vinyl. On the back as well, we have a simple zipper up top, open it up, and then the inside is waterproof canvas. Now waterproof canvas is great because you don't have to interface it. It's very firm, it's very easy to work with, and you can just easily wipe it down. You can wash it off, you can wipe it off. So I am gonna walk you through how to make this giant cookie pouch, but I want you to get creative with this. This is just a basic square and then we box the corners. You can see I have another version here, and on this version, I box the corners a little bit bigger than on this one, which makes it shorter. So if you want a taller bag, I'm gonna show you how to do that. If you want a shorter bag, I'll show you how to do that as well. Now this bag is fun because I actually told my mother I needed some cookies for the bag, so she made me a ton of my personal favorite cookies, which are these super yummy peanut butter cookies. I know. It smells so good. We have about 2 dozen in here. So this is a big cookie bag. This is a 2020, I need to just have a moment cookie bag. You can of course change the size of this based on whatever design you're working on. I am going to give you a lot of tips during construction on how to adjust sizes, how to adjust your zipper size, all of that. So there's not per se a pattern for this bag. I will have all the measurements that I'm using down in the description of this video. But like I said, I'm gonna give you lots of tips on how to adjust those measurements based on what size bag you wanna have finished. So once again, thank you so much to Bonnie from So Inspired by Bonnie for sending me these adorable little Santa Clauses. We're gonna make another one today where he's in a stocking, which is just so cute. I think I've almost made all of them. So these are just really, really fun to make. You'll find a ton of uses for these. In today's tutorial, I'm also going to be using a mighty hoop. After one of my previous tutorials using this machine, a lot of you suggested that I get mighty hoops. I was so fortunate. Mighty Hoops reached out to me. They offered to send me some hoops, so I'm very excited to play with this. They also sent a contraption for hooping shirts and everything. So we have a lot of tutorials coming up using the Mighty Hoop system. In today's tutorial, it's going to be pretty basic. We're just going to be hooping the stabilizer, and then we're going to float some cork on top of it, just like we did previously with the single needle. We're not going to hoop our exterior fabric unless you are using like a quilt cotton or something like that. Then you can go ahead and hoop it. But if you're using a vinyl or cork, something that doesn't really take well to being hooped and we don't want to stretch, we're just gonna float it on top. But I'm gonna show you that this is like so much easier to use than the hoops with the, with the turn screw things. So thank you so much to Mighty Hoops for sending these to me. I am so excited to show all the different things we can do with these hoops. If you're interested in checking out Mighty Hoops, I can highly recommend them, and I will have a link for them down in the description below. So first we're gonna talk about all the material we need for embroidery and for the bag, and then we're gonna go ahead and jump into the embroidery machine, get it embroidered, get our super glittery stuff appliqued on, and then after we embroider the project, we'll move to the table and we're gonna just build the bag. It's a very simple bag to make. If you're not used to making bags, I highly encourage you to give it a shot. So if you're new to the channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, anything at all, leave them down in the comment section. I will have timestamps for the various steps of this tutorial down in the comment section all the way at the top. If you're interested in just one part, like building the bag, click on the timestamp and it'll take you straight there in the video. All right, let's get started. So for the bag that we're working on today, I do suggest you get a ½ yard of vinyl or cork. Like I said, I like to make this bag with the exterior as vinyl or cork. You can of course use quilt cotton, but then you will have to hoop it. I won't be hooping my material today, I will be floating it. So I have this beautiful cork here from So Sweetness. You're gonna also want a generous amount of cutaway stabilizer. I like to double it up. I use 2 layers of cutaway with this design. I'll be using this beautiful glitter flex vinyl that Bonnie sent me from Sew Inspired by Bonnie. It works great with embroidery. We're going to applique this on and then press it in the end of the tutorial. To hold down the pieces at the machine, I will be using the Scotch tape. So here are the other items we'll be using in the tutorial today. I'm using this amazing 8x9 mighty hoop. This makes everything so much easier. I absolutely love it. It is a very, very, very strong magnet. Please keep this away from your computers and your phones. Anything really that could be damaged by a magnet. I always have 3 scissors that I use when doing embroidery, small snips, applique embroidery scissors. These just have a nice curve, and then good old Kai scissors. I'll be using Madeira 40 weight thread today, and I'll be using 10 different colors. And for the bobbin, I'm going to be using these magnetic bobbins from Madeira. Now on this multi-needle machine, we don't really use bobbins that are wound. We use these disposable ones. This little magnet on the bottom really helps with tension issues. I would highly recommend those. And here's the rest of the stuff we're going to need for the construction of the bag. You're going to need a 1/2 yard of lining fabric. Now I like to use waterproof canvas. I like that it's firm. I don't have to stabilize it. I like that I can easily clean it off. You can also use pull lining, which is PUL lining. That's a great option for snack bags because you can wipe it down. You just want to make sure you find one that's food safe. You're going to want a piece of zipper that when cut down is 10.5 inches long. So I'll be using zipper tape today, and I have a zipper pull to go with it. If you're using a pre-cut zipper, use a 10-inch or 12-inch zipper and then trim it down so that the full size is 10.5 inches long. You're going to need 2 small cuts of fabric for the zipper tab. These are both quilt cotton. They are not interfaced with anything, and they're each cut at 2 inches by 2 inches. I love using this 12-inch by 12-inch ruler. Since I'm going to be cutting all my panels down to 12 inches by 12 inches, this just makes it much easier. You don't need to use this, but if you have a ruler that's the size your panel needs to be cut down to, obviously use it. Again, my panels will be 12 inches by 12 inches. You are free to change the size of your panels to whatever size you want. A rotary cutter is going to be helpful in cutting all this down. I have my air erasing fabric marker, a stiletto and seam ripper as always, and then a good supply of clips. Okay, let's prep for our embroidery. I know that in the end, I want this to be cut down to 12 inches by 12 inches. However, I want some wiggle room. So I know that this is the finished size I want. Make sure if I have any slits over here, I think about that. But I want to be able to cut this down. You know, if I want to center my Santa a little bit higher or a little bit lower, I want that option. So my embroidery design today is a Santa that is going to be stitched out vertically. So I want this to be a little bit longer. And I'm just going to cut this out so that it's quite a bit bigger than I need it to be. So that way I don't have to worry so much about centering my Santa on the fabric. Now, I don't want my Santa to be centered like this. I'm going to do my best to keep him nice and vertical. But if he's a little to the left, a little up, it's going to be okay. I can trim it down later. There we go. And now I have a nice large cut that I can use for embroidering. So now I'm going to cut down my stabilizer. I grabbed the bottom hoop from my Mighty Hoops, and I just want my stabilizer to be bigger than that. Again, this isn't being measured in any way. And I am going to cut out 2 sheets. I don't know if you necessarily need to. I just like that extra stabilization for this. Since this is going to be used in a bag, I want it to be really firm. I don't want this to be loosey-goosey. All right, so now let's use the Mighty Hoop. To be completely honest, it's a little scary because it is such a strong magnet. So I'm going to take my Mighty Hoop and I'm going to lay it so that the side with the writing is down and it's faced up just like this. And then I'll take my stabilizer and lay it over the top. And then I'll grab my Mighty Hoop, and then this gray here is the magnetic side. So I'm going to lay that down. And holding the edges very carefully, bam, look at that. I didn't even have to get that close to it. I was like an inch away from it. That's crazy. And it looks like it's all good. So you see this side is a little bit farther away than this side. So if I wanted to fix it, I can always just pull them apart and then shift it down a little bit. And then again, holding it right over, boom. Look at that. And it's like it's literally a drum. That's a drum. That's amazing. Oh, I love this. I love this hoop so much. My little fingers are so happy now. Okay, so now we're gonna go install this at the embroidery machine, and then all we have to do is lay this on top, and the first few stitches will get it started. Now, if you want to kind of clip this down, you definitely can. However, I find this easiest to kind of let this be a little loose and just make sure it's centered right and let the machine do the work of holding it in place. But first, let's go install this. So I'm gonna be honest, This is the part that I'm still a little confused by, because on the EM1010, I don't think we can input our own hoop sizes. So if you click other, you see it's 3,000 times 3,000. If I click OK, my Santa is itty bitty. It's very hard to see. It's just because, you know, the canvas size is so big. So I'm actually going to click the D hoop for this one and click OK. And then what I'll do is I'll work on centering it with the machine by using the arrows, and we'll get it all worked out and we should be good. But that's the one thing I was a little kind of confused about. I can't put in the size of my actual hoop, which I think is just for the EM1010. I know for the other Ricoma machines you can input that size. And now before I add my material, I'm just going to make sure that everything is centered and how it should be. So I've got needle number 1 selected as my needle, and the goal is that when I push this down, it's centered on my hoop, and it's obviously not. So I'm going to use the arrows on my machine to move my hoop so that I can get this as centered as possible. On the front and back, that looks good. And now we look good on the side. Now see, because I did that, my Santa is all the way off over here. Now that might give me a problem. Let's see what happens when we try to trace it. So let me show you. When I trace this, it gets way too close to this top hoop. I'm going to have to readjust. I'm just going to hold it down a little bit. Let's see how it's like. The foot would hit that, so we don't want that. But on the back side, it's okay. So we're going to shift this a little bit to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, so I traced this out over and over and over again until I get it exactly how I wanted. I traced it so that the entire design fills up the center of this space. Hopefully it'll work. This is a bigger design than I've done before, so it is going to get a little bit closer to the hoops. That's okay. I think we'll be okay. Okay, and before you get started, always make sure you have your colors selected. There are actually a lot of steps to this one. So just make sure you download the color chart when you're using a multi-needle machine. The first 2 steps are just going to be marking where the applique is and then attaching the applique. So for the first 2 steps, since it's just applique, it doesn't really matter what thread color it is. You just want to make sure it's not the same color as the glitter you're going to be working with. So I'm going to use my white for those first 2 steps. After that, it's going to stitch out some texture, so I'm just going to choose red for that. And I will just quickly go through and pick out the thread colors for the rest of the design. So now we have all the thread colors picked. There are 18 different steps in this pattern today. It's always a little nerve-wracking doing this because you want to make sure you got all the threads right, but if you're off by one, your design might turn out a little crazy, but that's okay. So for the first 2 steps, I want it to stop before moving on. So I'm going to select the F, which means float those 2 steps. So for this first step, it's just going to stitch out where we're going to put our applique. So I want it to stop after that, come out so I can put down my glitter vinyl. And then after that, it's going to stitch down that glitter vinyl. And then I want it to stop again so I can trim around it. And then I'm just going to let the machine run on its own and finish the job. So I'm going to click OK when done. All right, so I've got my colors picked. I've got my design set up so that it shouldn't hit anything metal, hopefully. I will tell you I'm working with some glitter thread today, which I anticipate will break, so we might still have to address that. So now I have my giant piece of cork, and I'm just going to insert that into the machine and float it on top. And I am trying to keep it for the most part straight, but it doesn't need to be perfectly straight and centered. I'm just doing my best, really. There we go. All right, so I'm going to let it run the first applique stitches. So those stitches are a little hard to see on camera, but the nice thing about those placement stitches is that it also kind of lays down the material nice and flat, so you don't really have to worry about holding on to this. Now I'll be using this red glitter vinyl for my stockings, so I'm just going to cut a couple scrap pieces and make sure that they will fully cover the spots. That looks good, and that looks good. So now I'm going to remove the clear plastic that's on top and just lay this down to make sure it's covering all those stitches. Since this is a pretty big design, it's kind of tight in my hoop. I'm going to use tape to hold this down because with these multi-needle machines, I do not want to be holding it with my hands. I'm a little bit more comfortable doing that on my single needle when I have it going slow, but here I would rather not. So I'm just going to tape it down really well so it doesn't go anywhere. All right, now that I have these taped down, I'm just going to move on to the next step, which is going to be holding down the glitter vinyl. So once we have that done, all we have to do is remove our tape, and then you can remove this hoop from the machine if you'd like, or you can just leave it here and cut around your stitches. Just make sure you don't accidentally cut your vinyl or cork. All right, once you have that all cut out, now all we have to do is put it back in the machine, and the machine should do the rest of the work for us. If we're really lucky, we won't have any thread breaks or anything. Like I said, I'm using some fun matte thread and also some fun glitter thread, so it's very likely that one of those will misbehave and I will have to address it. But I don't have to change the thread for every single color, which I am very happy about.
Last year I thought about how things can come around just like that if everyone is here to celebrate one day. We have our ups and downs, but when there's love there's always a way. And oh, this time of year we come together to celebrate. Yes, every time the snow is falling down and it is cold outside.
Well, it happened. My sparkly, glittery vinyl broke, but it did really well so far, so I'm very impressed. I mean, it's a tricky thread. This machine is pretty smooth sailing, but then I throw the glow in the dark and the glitter and all my favorites at it, and it's a little tricky. And this, I would be honest too, this glittery thread I got, it is a huge pain to thread because it just frays like crazy. But it's such a pretty thread when it's stitched on. It's worth the pain.
We gather around the fireplace and no one cares about yesterday. My favorite holiday. It means so much more than words can say. And I claim that Christmas is a magic day. Sometimes I tend to forget what glory this holiday represents. But it's fair to say that Christmas is a magic day. This year I'll think about how I'm so lucky to have a place that I can come home to. Yes, I am on my way. We'll put our differences aside and just enjoy this moment of peace and love and happiness. We come together to celebrate. Yes, every time the snow is falling down and it is cold outside, we gather around the fireplace and no one cares about yesterday. My favorite holiday. It means so much more than words can say. And I claim that Christmas is a magic day. Sometimes I tend to forget what glory this holiday represents. But it's fair to say that Christmas is a magic day.
All right, now that that's been stitching out, we can remove this from the machine and clean it up, and let's turn it into a bag. So here is our design on our cork. So we can just remove the hoop. And be careful, these magnets, like I said, are very strong. Just pull it out of there. And they say if you have these hoops and you store them, you want to store them like this, so that the smaller hoop is on the top and both of the writing is up, and that just makes it easier for you to move it around and you don't have like that bam that you have if you store it on the bottom. So now I'm just very loosely cutting the stabilizer down. I'm not worried about getting it too close to the design. Since this is going in a bag, it's fine if it's not right up against the stitching. I just don't want it to be so big that the cutaway gets in the seams of the bag. So once that's cut down, we can flip it over, and if you have any little jump stitches or small threads that just need to get cut, go ahead and do that now. This little guy is so cute, isn't he? All right, so now we're going to cut this down so it's the size we want for the bag. So the goal is to cut this down to 12 inches by 12 inches. I have a 12 inch by 12 inch ruler, so that's what I'll be using. You could also use a 6 inch by 12 inch ruler and just find the midpoint and then trace it, draw it out, and then use scissors to cut this down. I'm going to use my giant ruler because I have it. Now, when we're boxing the bottom, something to consider is if you do a 2 inch boxed bottom, that means the bottom 2 inches of your exterior fabric are going to be folded under and you won't see it. So for example, if I had my Santa really, really low on my ruler, and then I cut him out like this, and I did a 2 inch box corner, the bottom of this little sock right here is going to be folded under and you won't see it. So I like to keep that in mind when I'm doing this. So if you had a 12-inch by 12-inch ruler, and then you find the midpoint, which is 6 inches by 6 inches, and then you centered your midpoint on the center of your Santa is actually going to lie a little bit lower on the bag rather than centered, because again, we're losing whatever we use for the box corner. Just something to think about. In today's tutorial, I'm actually going to be using a 2.5-inch box corner. So I know that this 2.5-inch mark down here is going to be the bottom of my bag. So I have to decide where I want my Santa to sit based off of that. So I am going to center him on the 6-inch mark going vertically as best I can. And I'm going to probably have him hover right on that 3-inch mark. So he's still kind of close to the bottom, but a bit more centered. And that looks straight enough for me. So now I'm just going to grab my rotary cutter and cut along these rulers. I really like this brand ruler. This is Quilter Select. It's got like a film on the back of it so that it doesn't move around on your material. It kind of sticks to it. It's not sticky. It's just not really smooth on the back. It's a great ruler for projects like this where you don't want it to move. All right, so let's remove that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to mark my box corners. For that, I'll use my 6-inch by 12-inch ruler. And I want 2.5-inch box corners. So I'm lining up my grid marks. So I make a little 2.5-inch box over here. I'll then use my fabric marker to just trace out that box. And I'll do this on the other side as well. Remember, I'm just working on the bottom edges right now. Don't box the top corners. Make sure you do the same size on both sides. Now real quick, let's talk about box corners. So you can see on this bag right here, if I measure from the center seam up, I have a 2-inch box corner. The bigger you box your corners, the shorter your bag will be, and the more of a V shape you're going to have. Because as you box your corners, you're making your base smaller and smaller. So for example, on this bag, from bottom corner to bottom corner is about 7 inches. At the top, it's about 11 inches. So when we box our corners, if we make our box corner bigger, this part is going to get smaller and it's going to V out more and it's going to be shorter. If you want a taller and straighter bag, just make your box corners a little bit smaller. Once you have your box corners traced, you can just grab some scissors and cut out those squares. And this should be what you're left with. So see, once this goes down, we're also going to lose a little bit with the seam allowance too. So it's always good to go bigger than you think you need to. And he'll be right on the bottom just like that. Go ahead and repeat this process for your other exterior panel and both of your lining panels. If you're using waterproof canvas, let me just remind you that the back side is that rubbery side. The right side of the waterproof canvas is that woven side. Now, before we move on to the zipper, let's just find the midpoint of each one of our panels along the top edge and mark that. So to do that, I just take my outer panel and I fold it so that the sides are together. And then I pull along to find the fold on that midpoint. Grab some scissors and just trim that corner. And there we go. Find the midpoint on the top of all 4 of your panels. Now, cut your zipper down so that it's 10.5 inches long. I like to use zipper tabs on the edges of my zipper. So when I do that, the goal is to not have the ends of the zipper or the zipper tabs in those side seams of the bag. For example, if you look at the top of this bag here, you can see I have my zipper tab and then there's a little hole between that zipper and the side seam of the bag. It's on both ends just like that. I like this look. I find that it reduces the bulk in the seams right here at the top and just makes it look a little bit cleaner. If you want to do that, I do suggest you have your zipper cut down 1.5 inches shorter than the top edge of your fabric. So for all of my panels today, this top edge is 12 inches long and my zipper is going to be 1.5 inches shorter than that, which is 10.5 inches. If you were adjusting the size of this to make a different size bag, that would be my rule of thumb. We are using a 3/8 inch seam allowance around the entire bag, and I find that that ratio works well together. So if you haven't already set your glitter applique, now we can do that. I'm just gonna grab a scrap piece of fabric and cover my design and my cork. I have a dry iron, and I'm just gonna press over the spots where my vinyl is. And this will just make sure the glue on the back of that heat transfer vinyl melts and it sticks to the design really well. You don't ever have to worry about it coming up. There we go. Once you have your vinyl attached, you can go ahead and put this to the side. Now grab your 2 zipper tabs. These are both 2" by 2" quilt cotton cuts, and lay them wrong sides up. And let's just fold them in half so 2 of the edges meet wrong sides together. Press along that edge with your iron. Do this for both of the tabs. Now you can open up your zipper tab and take the parallel edges and fold them wrong sides together up to meet that center mark. And then just press along that edge. Do the same thing on the other edge. So both of those long raw edges should be meeting in the middle on the back side of the fabric. And now you can take your unit and just refold it on that first fold. And you can grab a clip to just hold it together. Do this for both of your zipper tabs. Now grab your zipper and your zipper tabs, and we're just gonna hug our zipper tabs on the edges of the raw zipper. So on one of the short edges, I'm just gonna insert it into my folded zipper tab, just like that. Make sure it goes right up against the back edge of the zipper tab and clip it in place. Do the same thing on the other side. Now we can take this to the sewing machine and sew along this inner folded edge at 1/8 inch seam allowance. I will be using a zipper foot to sew everything together today. Today I'm sewing on a Bernina 350, which is a small domestic sewing machine. So after you have the zipper tab sewn on, you can just cut down the sides of those tabs so that it's the same width as your zipper tape. Okay, so now take your zipper and fold it in half, and we want to mark the midpoints. So I just line up the edges of my zipper, pinch that fold, and then once again I just use my scissors to clip just a tiny V on those corners. Do this on both edges of your zipper tape. Now grab your outer panel that has your design and lay it right side up. Grab your zipper, and when the zipper is closed, it should be on the left side. So closed, it's on the left side, open, it goes to the right. So when zipper's closed, it's on the left side. Take your zipper tape and lay it right side down, matching up the midpoints of your outer panel and your zipper tape. Clip on that midpoint mark first, and then just line up the rest of the edge. Your zipper is shorter than the top edge of your outer panel. Okay, so now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're just going to baste this on at 1/8 inch seam allowance. So we're just going to do a really long stitch right along the edge just to hold the zipper to the outer panel. So actually, before we move on, if you want to apply a bag tag here, now's a good time to do it. So I have this metal bag tag that I'll be applying, and I'm just going to have mine come down about 1.5 inches from the top edge. So I'll measure from that midpoint mark 1.5 inches down, make a dot, and then I'll take my washer and I'll just center that over my midpoint mark. And if you want to make it a little bit higher or lower, you can definitely do that now. And then I'm going to mark in the slits for my bag tag. There we go. I'm going to grab my seam ripper and just cut right along those slits. And I'm not cutting quite as long as the mark because I want this to be a tight fit for those prongs. Take your bag tag and make sure the prongs are sticking straight out, and then insert those through the slits on your bag and flip over. Now you can add a piece of fusible fleece here or a piece of firmer interfacing. What you can also do is grab one of the scraps from your outer vinyl or cork like I have. Mark those same prong lines on the back of that piece or on the front, it doesn't really matter. Use your seam ripper to rip those same slits. There we go. And now you can just take this scrap and insert it over your prongs, and that will help beef it up a little bit. Now this is a little bit too big. This will get eaten up, so I'm just going to trim it down. There we go. And then once you have that, you can then add your washer over it, and then you can just fold down those prongs however you like. Now you should also add a piece of fusible fleece or some sort of interfacing over the back of this so that these prongs don't rub the back of your lining. I don't actually have any fusible fleece where I'm at right now, so we're just going to leave this and we'll continue on with the bag. But now you see we have a nice little bag tag right over our Santa. So adding a tag here is completely optional, but it is a fun little look, especially when you work hard on a bag. So now grab one of your lining pieces, and with your exterior piece with your Santa right side up, take your lining piece and lay it right side down and match up those midpoint marks and then match up the sides. It should be the same size as your exterior piece. And then just clip along this entire top edge. And now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew along this top clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright, once you have those two sewn on, flip your exterior and your lining panels so that they are wrong sides together. If you're using any sort of quilt cotton here, you can press along this top seam by the zipper to hold it all in place. If you can't do that, just use some clips, and I like to clip down the bottom edges to get those lined up, and then that will help me line up the zipper as well. So now what I'm going to do here is just kind of tug on my zipper to try to get this top edge as straight as possible. And I'm just finger pressing it. And now we're going to top stitch along this top folded edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. When top stitching, you're only top stitching along the zipper. Don't top stitch the ends. So you should have about 3/4 of an inch on both ends where you don't top stitch. So just top stitch the zipper part. There you go, you've got 1/2 attached. Now we're just going to repeat that process for the other side. So take your remaining exterior panel, lay it right side up. Take your other panel and lay it right side down. So the right side of the zipper should be against the right side of the opposite exterior panel. Let's clip along the midpoint and then clip the entire edge. So now let's take this to the sewing machine and base stitch along this clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're only holding this in place right now. Once you have that basted on, lay your unit so that the wrong side of the zipper is up. Grab your last lining piece and lay that right side down against the back of your zipper. Line up those midpoint marks, clip those first, and then clip the entire top edge of your lining panel to your zipper and to the exterior panel. Now we'll sew along this entire top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have those stitched onto the zipper, just pull that exterior panel and that lining panel so that they are wrong sides together. Once again, I like to clip along the bottom edges just to hold it together, and then flip it over. Close your zipper all the way, and then you can just kind of pull on this and finger press that seam right along the side of the zipper, trying to get this as straight as possible. If you're using any sort of quilt cotton here, you can definitely press this. You could also use some tape on the back of this to try to hold it down, but honestly, I find finger pressing it and then just paying attention to it at the sewing machine works pretty well. If you're using thread that's about the same color as your exterior fabric, you're really not going to notice if this isn't perfect. So now let's take this back to the sewing machine and top stitch along this other edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once again, we're going to start and stop our stitches about 3/4 of an inch from each end, so it should just be along your zipper tape. So there we go. Now we just need to sew the bag together. So open your zipper, take your exterior fabrics and fold them up right sides together, and then fold your linings right sides together as well. And we're going to just clip along all of the edges so that we can keep everything lined up and matched up nicely. Once you get to the seam between the lining and the exterior, I like to flip that seam so that it's going down towards the lining. It naturally wants to go towards the exterior because that's the way we top stitched it, but I personally like it going down towards the lining. So I'm just going to push the seams towards the lining and clip those in place. And then I'll just clip all of the edges of this. Okay, now we can take this to the sewing machine and sew it all together. So on the exterior side, you're going to sew everything at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You're going to sew along the side and the bottom and the other side. You're not going to sew on these box corners here. You're going to leave those alone. Make sure you backstitch well at every edge. So around these box corners, backstitch really well because we will be pulling on those later. At the seam between the lining and the exterior fabric, you're going to sew it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance or as close as you can get to the edge of the zipper tab without actually sewing over it. The goal is to not sew that fabric zipper tab. It's very bulky. You should not be able to miss it. Don't sew on that zipper tab. I like to use my zipper foot in order to get really close to it without actually sewing on it. For the lining side, after you get into the lining side, you can increase your seam allowance to 1/2 inch. So right here at the seam, it's a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to increase it to 1/2 inch seam allowance, do a full 1/2 inch seam allowance on the bottom, and then on the other side 1/2 inch, making sure you decrease it to a 3/8 inch once you get to this seam. Once again, backstitch well at all of these corners because you will be pulling on these in the next step. On this short bottom edge of your lining panel, mark yourself a 4-inch opening. That should be big enough. There we go. And just don't sew between these marked lines. So from one edge to the marked line, you'll sew at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and from the other marked line to the edge, you'll sew at 1/2 inch seam allowance. But leave this middle part here unsewn. All right, so once you have all those edges sewn down, you can trim down the seam allowance just a bit. I mean, I would just shave off a little bit on the exterior, but on the lining panels, you can trim down that seam allowance in half. On the bottom of the lining panel, you can trim down the sewn edges, but don't trim down that open edge. Leave that longer. That'll make it easier for you to close this in the last step. So now all we have to do is box the corners. So starting with the exterior panel, just pull open the corner edges and pull it so that the seams from the bottom and the sides come together. Now I just rotate them in opposite directions. So my bottom seam is going to go to the right, my side seam is going to go to the left. You just want to rotate them so that they kind of give each other a little hug and then clip there. If you're having a hard time getting this part straight, pull down towards the center of your bag and then work on straightening it up. I notice a lot of times that can be the problem. If you pull down lower, then this will be easier to get it straight. So straighten out that corner and just add some clips along the entire edge. So now we're going to do the same thing on the other exterior corner. Just make sure you fold your bottom seam in the same direction that you did on that first corner. And then straighten out those raw edges and clip in place. Okay, now let's take these two corners to the sewing machine and sew along the clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. There we go. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the lining. So once again, I'm going to kind of pull it from the middle and the bottom of the lining. And that'll make it easier for me to get a straight edge up here at the top. So I'm just going to rotate those seams in opposite directions again. Clip along the seam and then just clip the entire straight edge and do the same thing for the other side. Now I'm going to sew along these two clipped edges of our lining panel at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Alright, so once you have those corners sewn together, you can just turn this out. So put your hand in through the bottom. I think I might have made it a little too small. 4 inches a little small. And then just push the exterior and the lining through that hole in your lining. Alright, once you've got it all pushed out, just put your hand into the back of the exterior and push out those corners. There we go. Yeah, that looks cute. This Stitchout was a lot bigger than the other ones I've done, so this turned out really cute. So now let's close up this lining. All you have to do is put your fingers into the sides of that lining hole and just give it a tug, and it should fold down on itself. And then just finger press it and add some clips to hold it in place. Now we can just sew along this clipped edge at a 1/8 inch seam allowance. So once that is closed up, you can just insert your lining into your exterior, push the corners of your lining all the way down to the corners of your exterior. And then for these top corners by your zipper, just put your finger underneath and push them out. So see how originally they're kind of tucked in like that? If you just push from the inside of your bag out, you can pop them out really nicely. And there we go. Now we have an adorable Santa cookie bag. I just love these so much. Honestly, I could make 1,000 more. They're so adorable. This is a great gift idea. It's so cute. Oh my gosh, look at these colors. I think that this is a beautiful gift for this season. I think fill it up with cookies. Embroider whatever you want on it. It doesn't have to be a Santa Claus. It can be whatever you want. Fill it up with some cookies though. Fill it up. Or maybe you can fill it up with like a bubble bath set or a hot cocoa mix set. This is just a beautiful way to gift something this holiday season. I personally think this is a perfect snack bag size. I'm just saying, holiday season, you know, my mom makes some rum balls and you just fill this up and then you can get in some trouble. But I honestly just love this cookie bag. So like you saw, we did a 2.5-inch box corner on this, which means it's a little bit shorter and a little bit fatter, and it has a nice V shape going up. On this bag over here, we did a 2-inch box corner. So you can see it's just a bit taller. And then you can see the embroidery designs are totally different too. On this bag here, we have a smaller embroidery design. On this bag, we have a larger embroidery design. You can really just switch this up however you like. You can switch up the dimensions. Like I said, take my tips about how to box the corners, how to adjust the zipper size. But really, these are just rectangles and squares and a zipper. It's really easy to put together something very unique and very fun with these. And yes, because I know somebody will ask, you can add D-rings to the sides of this and make it your cookie crossbody. I wouldn't judge you for that, and I might actually make myself one as well. So I hope that you enjoyed today's tutorial. I hope that if you have an embroidery machine, I hope you're using it this holiday season. It's a really fun way to gift some really unique items to the people that we love. I know a lot of us aren't going to be seeing everybody that we normally would this year, so this is just a beautiful way to gift something. It's like a hug. It's like a little hug that you're sending in a little bag. Thank you so much for sewing with me today. I hope you're having a great day, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. Get out there and make something. Bye.
Yes, every time the snow is falling down and it is cold outside, we gather around the fireplace